Welcome back, everybody. For those of you who just came in the last few minutes, you might not know that the music that was being played while we were out having coffee was Lou Reed's Take a Walk on the Wild Side, which struck me as the only scientific meeting I'd ever been to where that actually happened. You know, before the break, we heard two really interesting, different points of view about barley. One, Flavio's, was about, the international picture in terms of increasing yield and varieties. And then Thava's was more on take barley, but do something different with it, develop it into different marketable products. And we're about to hear a similar sort of story, that is taking something familiar and turning it into something different and hopefully profitable. This time, though, the familiar is canola, which I, having been a city guy all my life, argue that urban Albertans, it's the only crop they can recognize. But the yellow, the famous yellow of canola, is really just a superficial aspect of the crop. There's much more to it than that. To hear about some of those possibilities, please welcome Jonathan Curtis. He's a professor in the Lipid Chemistry group at the, by now, very well-known AILS at U of A. Jonathan. Oh, I'm going to go ahead.
Thank you for that nice introduction and for the invitation to speak here, which is a great honor. I'm going to wander around here, I think. So you may be wondering why I have such a crazy title. And this came about because I had the good fortune to be on holiday in the Bahamas earlier this year when I received a somewhat nagging email from Alberta Innovates Biosolutions as to why I hadn't given them a title for my talk. And so my talk is generally going to be about converting oils that we can grow in Alberta into materials and chemicals. And so on the day I received this email, I visited a place called the Garden of the Groves on Grand Bahama Island, which I thoroughly recommend. And there they have this labyrinth. So let's go inside the labyrinth and see where we get to. Well, the first thing you'll find out is what is a labyrinth. And labyrinths are found in many cultures around the world, perhaps most famously in some cathedrals in Northern Europe, where they were the paths that some pilgrims took that allowed them time to meditate as they meandered towards the center of the labyrinth. Here's me in the center of the labyrinth, having taken my path. And although the amazing thing about a labyrinth is that although it doesn't seem very far from the outside to the middle of the labyrinth, it probably took about 20 minutes to walk this whole path. And it struck me that on that day that was a fantastic analogy for applied research, because there we are on the outside, we can see where we want to be in the middle. In the case of this talk, we want to convert some of these oil products that we have in abundance into new materials and chemicals that give added value and benefit. So I could see the center of the labyrinth, but as I get there, I have to take these counterintuitive turns in the wrong direction, often moving away from the center in order to get to where I want to go. So let's start with our labyrinth idea, and we have canola oil that comes from these yellow fields that Jay introduced, turns this into this lovely yellow oil that we use for cooking. So here in Alberta, we grow a lot of canola. We grow about 1/3 of the Canadian crop. Canada produces 30% of the world's production of canola. It's worth many billions of dollars to our province. But here's the problem. This data, which came from the Canola Council, shows the economic impact. And most of this economic impact is this green bar, which is the farming portion. What I'm talking about today is this little pink part, which is the end uses, that value-added products that we could get from canola. And the problem that we have today is that's very small. So my talk is about how do we improve that? Well, the way we improve that is through something called oleochemistry. So oleochemicals are something that you're probably don't know that you're so familiar with, but they're everywhere in your everyday life. So for example, most soaps and detergents, many cosmetic products, these are oleochemicals. These are things that have been made by taking the oil crops on the left, and converting them into some of these products on the right, paints and coatings. Many of them contain oils. But most oleochemicals are made from either palm oil, which is the most widely produced oil in the world, or soya oil, which is the second most. What I want to talk today is about canola oil and perhaps some other less well-known oils. And canola is the third most produced oil in the world. The first project I want to talk about is how we can convert canola into a chemical which can eventually become foam insulation for your house or for an industrial building. So polyurethane spray foam insulation, which you've probably come across, has about double the insulation value, double the R value of fiberglass, which is the most commonly used insulation material. So it's a great product, but in addition, it's a vapor barrier. It doesn't sag like fiberglass does. If you've ever renovated an old house, you'll know that the fiberglass ends up at the bottom of the wall. And so there's a lot of advantages. So it can result in energy efficiency. And if we could make that somewhat bio-based, there's more advantages still. So the way you make polyurethane is by blending two components, one of which is called compound A, which is a chemical we're not going to talk about, called isocyanate. And the other is compound B, and these come in separate drums. And compound B is a complex mixture of chemicals, but the majority of it is something called a polyol. So just remember that word polyol. What we want to do is we want to take the petrochemical polyol out of it and turn it into an oleochemical polyol, which would be made from canola. So in the spray foam process, these two streams pass through separate tubes that you can see here. They come up to a heated nozzle, and they're sprayed out with the pressure of gas. And at the bottom photograph here, you can see a demonstration facility where we've been testing these foams. And what has to happen is this foam has to hit the wall, but it has to almost immediately expand into foam, because right now it's two jets of separate chemicals. As it expands into foam, it has to cure, it has to reach the right density, has to stick to the walls, and it mustn't run down the walls. It's a very complicated technical process that's required to achieve all those things. So just to go back to that word polyol, which is this oleochemical that we've been making, for a number of years we've been working on the development of these polyol compounds, and we went through a number of processes, largely funded by our friends at AcidF, and that resulted in a patent which has been granted. And we now have a company in Vancouver who is making small production scale lots of this polyol. It's been through several generations since, but that's another story for another time. So we took our biopolyol that we've developed through this chemistry, and we tried to make it into foam, and the result was biofoam, and biofoam is going to become a commercial product. So I don't want to go in too much detail in it, but biofoam has to meet all the same performance criteria that any kind of spray foam would meet. So it has to have that fast rising time. It has to become a foam quickly. It has to cure quickly. It has to have the moisture barrier that you need. It reaches the right density to get the right R value at the end of the day, and the right strength, and so on and so on. And to cut a long story short, we've managed to achieve that. So that's great. So here we are, back to our labyrinth, where we've started with this concept. We've come up with a process. We have chemistry happening, and we can turn that into a formulation which becomes biofoam. So that's great. We're going in, and we're starting to move straight towards the center of the labyrinth. So all's looking good. Well, one example of how we could use this foam is given here. And one of the companies we're working with is called Mod Panel. It's here in Edmonton. And on the right, you can see a picture of the arena being built a few blocks away from here. And the roof panels of the arena are these mod panels, which are prefabricated roofing panels that already incorporate spray foam insulation. We want these to be our canola-based biofoam, and so as we move forward, this will become a reality. Now, an important aspect of all this, it's not just good enough to just make a bio substitute for an existing product. It's also important to consider the overall life cycle environmental impact of that. And this is what we looked at with our partners at Green Analytics, who I believe have already spoken at this event in previous years with our CCMC funding. And to cut a long story short, this graph shows all of the calculations of the greenhouse gas life cycle emissions. And we found that the climate change impact for the bio-based spray foam was about 20% lower than for petrochemical spray foam. Now, this makes all kinds of assumptions about where it comes from, how much is shipped around, how much we use, and this is probably an upper value. We may end up with only 10%, but nevertheless, over the life cycle of this, it's a significant saving. But as with our labyrinth, there are all kinds of twists and turns, and we may have to move backwards sometimes. So here's just an example when I finally got to have a chemical structure, and I'm a chemist, I can't really give a talk without a structure sooner or later. So this just shows you the details aren't very important, but what this shows is that in considering the overall environmental impact, we also have to consider that there's no point making this product if it's not used. So it has to meet all of the requirements, which are those of the current specifications. Currently, people tend to use in these spray foam insulations a molecule that's a fluorocarbon as what's called a blowing agent. So the blowing agent ends up inside the bubbles. The foam is made up of a number of closed cell bubbles all joined together. And inside those bubbles, we have this blowing agent which add to the R value of the overall material. If we don't use the same blowing agents, we don't get the same R value, and so we can't compete on the current market. And currently, the one that's used, although it is no longer the fluorocarbons that were once used, which are ozone-depleting chemicals, they've been eliminated. Now we have these molecules, but they still are potent greenhouse gases, and if they're released from the foam into the atmosphere, that could be a negative. So there are new generations of blowing agents coming along, and as we evolve this product, we will certainly incorporate them. But I just want to point out, like, you can't solve all the world's problems in one iteration, and these are one of these twists in the labyrinth that take you away from where you want to go, but that you have to take in order to reach the goal. And another aspect of is it that Green Analytics are developing monitoring tools that allow a consumer who may have installed biofoam insulation in the future into their home to see what their overall energy savings would be. And so you can imagine taking an entire region, perhaps building new houses, and seeing how moving from traditional insulation to biofoam could have an overall impact on energy savings and help you to work out carbon credits and such. So here we are, we've moved further in our labyrinth now. We've almost got to the center, but now we're sort of moving away because we're starting to see all these issues. We've got our canola becomes our plant. We've found our formulation, so things are looking good, but you know, we're not quite sure where we're going here. But there's good news on the horizon, and that good news is that globally, there's a tremendous interest in bio-based chemicals, and oleochemicals are great examples of bio-based chemicals. And this plot, that again, the numbers don't really matter, but the prediction is that there'll be a great increase over the next 10 years in the use of oils in materials and chemicals, starting materials. But I suspect that this plot was made, I don't know all the details of it, but I suspect this was made based on the growth of the palm oil industry and the soya industry, not on the canola industry. So that's what we need to change. So we have lots of other ideas of how we can use the oils that we can grow in Alberta to promote the use of these oleochemicals and to promote industry here. So another project that we have, that's recently been funded by Alberta Innovates Biosolutions is to work with the biocomposites group who have the locally fairly well-known first fiber mat plant in North America in Drayton Valley, where they can convert forestry and agricultural fibers into mats, which can then be sealed with resin and made into panels for cars or boards for houses or furniture or all kinds of applications that haven't been dreamed up yet. So what we want to do, what we're going to do in this project is we're going to take our bio-resin technology, which is another thing we've done. It's based on old technology brought to the new century with some new ideas so we can make fully bio-based resins, combine that with bio-based fiber and make materials which are going to be great. And this project, a collaborator on this project, Dr. Shari Aranansi is going to talk after me, so that will be, you may hear more about these types of things. So another idea we had to make oil more useful in other areas is that we were really interested in this oil called castor oil. So castor oil is a tropical oil. It mainly is grown in India, a few other tropical places as well can grow it. Obviously in Alberta, where we can have snow any month of the year, as people love to say, we can't grow it. But there are other crops, and one of those that we're interested in is called Camelina. And we have a project with a company called Linnaeus, who are out of Vancouver, who are really interested in the production of Camelina. Now, castor oil is used in a huge range of industrial products. It's used in polymers. It's used in many personal care items. It's used in lubricants. It's a very big industrial crop, and it's particularly useful because it contains it's almost a pure source of this molecule here, which we won't go into except to say that it is a natural kind of polyol. So we would really like to be able to make something just like that using a crop we can grow here. And our goal is that if we could make this product, and we have developed something called COROL, which is now, we have a patent application on, if we could make this commercially here and capture just 5% of the castor oil market, that would be worth $100 million a year to the Alberta or the Alberta and Saskatchewan economies, and that's just for the crude oil. The downstream products that could be made for it could be much more valuable. So we've come a long way through the labyrinth. We started with We started with canola. We started with other oil crops such as hemp, which I didn't talk about, but was the source of those fiber products. Flax. Maybe we're starting to get some oleochemical industry going, and I'm happy to say that Alberta Innovates Biosolutions have recently funded the Biofoam Group to develop the facilities to make biofoam on a commercial scale, on a small commercial scale, and to develop plans for generating this polyol on a more meaningful scale in Alberta in the future. So we're very excited about that. So the oleochemical industry will gradually get developed. We'll be able to make these products. There's many challenges in this, but as it says on the slide, if you stay on the path, you'll reach the center, and that's what we believe in. This is a photograph of my group, the Lipid Chemistry Group, who have done all this work. I just stand at the front and talk, and so I'm very grateful to all of them. And I'm grateful to all of the many funders and industrial collaborators, and in between groups like the former Biorefining Conversions Network, who have helped to make connections for us. And thank you for your attention.
So I get the labyrinth idea, but it seems to me there's so many critical decisions that have to be made, like what crop. But I want to go back and just ask you specifically, how did you come up with the idea that of all the things you might use canola for, it was foam, insulation?
That's a great question. And in fact, a constant problem I've had since I moved into working with materials has been, well, that's great, we can make a material, but what do we do with it? And I ask lots of people this same question, and I very rarely get a good answer because nobody really knows. I think the short answer is it turns out that the material, the chemical we can make, the oleochemical we can make, is ideally suited to making rigid foam insulation. So I think you just have to find those applications which really hit the sweet spot for what you can make. And there are many oil crops that we can look at, and so the range of products is huge.
Great. Thank you again.